happened already firmly in the choice of the city and the venues chosen for it. Like many others, I could not but respond to its potential. I'd rarely encountered an exhibition space that was so raw, marked by time of both ancient and recent history, responding, or rather letting itself be written on by the vibrant life around it. Not being a protected monument to history allowed certain liberties. Many of the spaces already spoke as if in artistic terms, in a floor that had seeped salt through its pores, a dead crane lying preserved in its dying moment on the floor of a ceramic tile lab, complete with counters and leftover bits of its curious past life, in objects which had left traces of their presence, on walls that had grown beautiful colored stains around vein like delicate roots, in covered sheds which bright green creepers tried to inhabit, in telltale signs of occupation by watchmen and seabirds. Perhaps this was the unique challenge of Kochi. One had to ask the question, what is art beyond what nature exhibits and clearly wins? How can one's own artistic sensibility and language be deployed in the midst of a self exhibiting space celebrating its own materiality and history? Does an artist's work become merely a celebration of his or her subjectivity? And if not, how does it not become mere information, a reportage, an illustration to a theoretical idea? How could it evoke feelings that could lead to questioning thought processes? The Kochi Biennale curators had identified the potential of its venues with an artist's understanding of spaces and materials. But limited by the lack of funds, time, and resources, and perhaps intentionally or by default, they gave freedom to artists that is rarely given. For the same reasons, the spaces were not spruced up and turned into white cube galleries. In Venice, which Kochi closely resembles, the Arsenale venue is a crumbling historical monument. To exhibit there is to acknowledge this to begin with, but restrictions are strictly enforced. Apart from a few existing white plywood walls in front of the brick ones, the walls are not to be messed around with, even if they are messing one's work with bits of crumbling plaster and brick. Kochi promised freedom but was limited by inadequate technical help and basic necessities. Artists, therefore, were not merely installing their work, but were challenged to rethink their work and its means. The site of the Biennale became an artist studio, which is an unusual condition. Participation became a process of dealing with the politics of the place and its people. I never, for example, experienced the extreme unionization of workers and their power to make or break your work schedule, a public so politically argumentative. The entry of the protagonist of my work, The Grinding Stones, into Kochi had a dramatic beginning. Transported from Bangalore in 3 trucks, they were spied on and followed to their destination by workers' union men on scooters. Each grinding stone weighed an average of 200 kgs, and together they added up to 24 tons. Sitting beside each other on the back of the trucks, with no fussy packaging around them, they did not have a clear demarcation to be identified as a piece of stone, a utility object, or an artwork. This ambiguity led to the problem. At the moment of unloading, a serious argument ensued between the 2 subgroups within the incongruously dressed blue uniform communist union team, between those who handled building material and those who did general materials. The identity of these stones fell somewhere between, as it did for my co-artist Christoph Stotz and me as well. The difference was only a matter of emphasis. The stone's weight was for us an integral part of the work. For the workers, its weight was a matter of sweat and muscle. After many hours of near blows, a police inspector's visit, and further talks between the leaders of the 2 factions summoned to the police station, the unloading began rather late in the day. However late it might get, it was imperative to place the stones as close to their final positions in the space, because the next day I would have to then deal with a red uniformed Congress team, which would mean another round of fresh negotiations. The Congress and Communist teams had, I was told, come to an agreement to divide the Biennale work on alternate days. The stones were unloaded and transported to the space using only improvised methods. Overall, it proved to be a very efficient team once their union differences were sorted out. In 2007, I had made an artwork using 17 grinding stones for the Lyon Biennale. Christoph, in his writing for the small book Ground Shift that I published at the time, had conceptualized a passage from the home to the streets, crossing borders of tradition and social acceptability, making a long journey over the seas to Lyon, crossing other kinds of borders and customs along the way. From being unwanted traditional utility objects, they moved to another state of visibility as art objects. My own interest in them, apart from their slow, sly movement from the inside of a house to the outside, was the recognition of their special predicament that spoke of changing times and needs, of fear of violating sanctities. I was also totally enamored of their physical appearance. Two areas that have always engaged me: the cultural local specificity of the object and their abstraction, both in form and meaning, were intrinsically present in them. Since my first interest in these stones, I had desired to see them assembled together in large numbers as a mass that would counter the dominance of its narrative. The stones had come from different homes and had spices ground in them for decades, but had outlived their need. Aspinwall, which is also defunct in its role as a storehouse for spices, destined for other shores, was therefore a perfect partner. The selection of a site for a work is a two-way process. There is the faint scent of a pre-existing idea, and there are sites that throw up new ideas. Aspinwall was overwhelming in its possibilities. Perhaps another room could have produced a different work on my part. A room with a large door to the sea and the outer space of a jetty leading right up to the water seemed right for a dialogue to begin. Sites visits are a luxury for many artists participating in a biennale. I have made a biennale visit only twice, to Sharjah and now to Kochi. The selection of a site for a work already made or to be made, especially if it is an installation, is based on the needs you express and the imagination and space possibilities suggested by the curators. This process happens through a back and forth, tense correspondence when thoughts and decisions are still in the making on both sides. It is exciting and frustrating at the same time. It sometimes leads to ambitious new thoughts or limits your choices. Taking advantage of Riaz's preoccupied state during my site visit, I pushed for 100 stones to be transported from Bangalore. In the end, I added a 0 to the 17 I had used for Lyon and ended up with 170 of them. Histories and facts, however obvious, do not make an artwork. Materiality and form are aspects that artists need to engage with. These stones were almost identical in one way. Each had a square ridge sculpted on the perimeter of one of its 6 sides with a 6-inch depression in the center. It was an abstraction repeated 170 times. But each of these 170 stones was also unique. Their size varied, the remaining 5 sides were cut uniquely and therefore rested differently. This was the other abstraction, a cube of raw stone. In order to bring their form into the dialogue, we needed a pointer. If not, their presence could have been seen as a one-liner, a collection of found objects as a celebrating display of phenomenological evidence. To question or problematize this preconception of evidence, we chose to painstakingly paint using soft black paint and very heavy lines, perfect grids on imperfect walls. Covering 2 sides of the room, they helped bracket the stones, squeeze them into the room in a way. The stones set placed in a regimented grid within the room then seemingly became chaotic, crowding and jostling towards the large open doorway, creating a bottleneck of tension before pushing towards the river. Perhaps the movement was the reverse. The viewing public is seldom predictable. The familiarity of the stones evoked confusion or giggles in some. Many, spotting the water beyond, were drawn instantly towards it. Those who responded to the aesthetics of so many sculpted yet raw stones were intrigued and even critical of the heavy grid on the walls, and many seemed to have lost contact with the objects that were once familiar and considered sacred. They used them as stepping stones to reach the water. Thank you.
I put together some images. They are not necessary. They are kind of illustrative to what I have said just now. Some may look plainly, simply aesthetic, but it was a set of them are like being artist tourists in the Aspinwall premises. Another set illustrates the tension between what I described as that a moment when an object or a material becomes art, or the differences in perception in certain given moments. And the third is basically some images of the work. These were things that we responded to in each of the rooms in Aspinwall. And I guess in a way it evoked certain artistries for us as they were, without having to bring it in a conscious way. This was in fact the space where Amar Kanwar showed his videos. And this is what I told the police: this is my artwork, not building material. I hope that statement would help resolve the issue between the two teams. But I think it's also goes with the statement that art is what art is. When artists declare it is art. These are some of the processes of bringing it, which in a way showed the tension between material and body movement. These are the location of the stones where they were found in Bangalore. This was this was how I showed it in Leon, where the stones played a very small role in the actual stones. These are how they're found in the streets in Bangalore. They're not always so conveniently together, but this was a space, or rather the potential of the space for me when I first saw it. The large door remained closed till the stones were being unloaded into the space. So I had to actually use a lot of my own imagination to think what it would look like once the door was open and the jetty opened up into the thing. I thought that might be interesting to have an archaeologist on my site. This was something that appeared in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, apparently written about the Biennale. And I thought it was an interesting one because of the public interface with the work. This was something that Christoph was conceptualizing, very impractical, but I think it just, I think it works best in a digital version. Thank you.
I've got very good protocol of introductions and thank you and sorries, which I told Kavita this morning that the ceremonial parts of conducting a symposium. So forgive me that I don't introduce, I take it for granted that most of you know.
So thank you. I've not been introduced, but I didn't hear that one. But anyway, well, we have time's running out. First, I would like to say that I'm completely partisan and with the Kochi Muziris Biennale. I've been involved with it for a very, very long time, and Riaz and Bose came to meet us, and in a sense been very much part of the process. Subsequently, my activist self has been very much in the forefront of supporting the Biennale, of making public statements for it. And of course, Riaz didn't mention, but they are in great debt. The government has given some money, but even that's been checkmated by one very mean artist who went to the court just the day before it was to shut for 1.5 months vacation. So they are very much in that state. Now, when I was invited for the Biennale, I hadn't heard of Muziris, which I think most of you wouldn't have heard. And on Googling it and finding things about it, I immediately felt that the word and the site were things that I could immediately relate to, that there were histories in my own work that would make me go there and think of making a work. I've been very interested in journeys. I've done a whole lot of series of pastels way back in the mid-80s. I've made many boats. So in one sense, this relationship of journey and boat and the sea are part of my, shall I say, history in a manner of speaking. I've also, using the word history, been interested in a historical project, and that namely is for doing a site-specific installation in the Victoria Memorial, a history project about Bengal and modernity. And as you know, I'm not Bengali, I'm not a historian, but spending over a year in Calcutta, and what was very important for me was to establish relationship and dialogue with people, with historians, social scientists, and writers. And finally, almost a year later, I made a site-specific installation working for 3 months in the Darbar Hall. So even for this project, I thought, okay, Muziris, and then I suggested this to Riaz, and I said I read the name of one director, Cherian, who in fact, Sheila's already mentioned him. And she said, yeah, sure, he's a very nice man, and you can go and meet him. So I went to this place called Pattanam, which even today, what archaeologists still do not want to be acknowledged, that this is or was the site of the port town Muziris. But for some reason, historians have been also looking for this site, which around 300 AD sort of just disappeared. And so from 300 AD literally till about 15 years ago, nobody knew where this place was. But it was mainly the historians who were sort of walking and looking for this place. And Romila Thapar has told me, as you know, she's a very famous historian of ancient art, that she's walked many times up that coast looking for this place. But anyway, as these stories go, somebody gave them a little decorated potsherd with some design on it, and it turned out that it is a Roman amphora, piece of a Roman amphora vase. So meeting, going to Pattanam and meeting Muziris was one very special and unique experience, because he was so open and so friendly, not knowing what I would encounter. P.J. Cherian actually is a historian of the modern period, but he got disillusioned and went to archaeology. And through that discussion, I learned a lot about the relationship of history and archaeology. In fact, Romila Thapar is a great believer that historians must engage with archaeology and be involved with any dig about any period. It doesn't just mean Ashokan times or earlier times. She even believes that if some colonial building is found ruined and there's a dig, that the historian should also go there. So at that level, I kind of was quite engaged with this relationship between the historian and the archaeologist. Now, visiting the site, which is in a tiny little village now, you drive through those typical Kerala village come sort of towards being a town. you come to this open field, which obviously the persons who lived there have agreed to give the land where the excavation had been taking place for 4 years. And in that open field, there were these huge cement circular bins. There must have been kind of pipes in some way, about 4.5 feet high, and scattered all over. And I suppose if I was a certain kind of artist, I could have said, wow, this is a fantastic site-specific sculpture, found sculpture. And I would have told the Biennale people that, look, my artwork is there, and please direct people 30 kilometers away to go and see this, because this is really, I mean, a fantastic piece of sculpture. But my other reference was that my previous exhibition was called Trash, and I had created a city almost as big as this in my studio, 20 feet by 60 feet, out of trash, out of garbage, which was collected. And Cherian said, oh, there are 4 million of these shards, and he used the word discarded. So I said, oh, well, we are on the same ground. I use trash, and you use the word discarded. And he said, you can take as many as you like, and you can create what you want to. In fact, he'd heard of me, and he said, I'm waiting, in fact, for an artist to come and use this, because over these years he was so obsessed with this material that he wanted in some way for its transformation to take place. So the first journey of these shards, actually I have to now give you a little important bit of information. I said I would like to have about 100 kilos of them and make a small kind of maquette in my studio and get a sense of it, because my project was a video project. And these arrived, and I have to now ask young artist Bala Gopalan, will you stand up, Bala? Because he is the person who has made this entire installation that you see. And when I say made, we together made this small maquette about 6 feet by 12 feet. I also videoed it because I wanted, in a sense, to know what it looked like. Now, the other bit of information is that my original proposal to the Biennale was that I wanted to make a video out of it, and I would need the space as the set to get the cameras and the tracking and the crane shots, etc. And so it was set up, and it was shot. And then the plan was to remove it. And there were many artists as well as members of the Kochi Biennale. And they said, but how can you remove it? I said, well, I haven't asked for it, so I'm expected to remove it. So anyway, there was a very nice discussion. And I was told that Subodh Gupta is going to come with a huge boat. And I couldn't extend that far out. So if it was to remain, I'd have to compromise and cut the length of it. But Riaz very sensibly said I could broaden it. So actually what you see is, in one sense, by a different route. In fact, Bose was a little nervous. He said, what will Subodh Gupta said. So I said, you heard the word occupy. I'm sorry, I'm occupying this space. But it's occupation, I think, both for me as well as for Subodh, and I was actually a little nervous because mine was sort of flat, very minimal, and here would come this 60-foot boat which would be propped up because the ceiling was about 50 feet high or more, that it would be propped up at about 40 feet. And if it was full of stainless steel vessels, then there would be nothing left of this flat bit of very minimal piece. And in fact, Geeta was very nervous also, that are you taking a risk? Do you want to be dominated by this famous artist doing these big works? So I said, I'm willing to take a risk. And this is a joke aside, but you know the story of Gulliver and the Lilliputians, that the little finally did their job. Anyway, what I want to say is that this relationship between garbage, between the throwaway, between the fragment has deeply engaged me. And in one way, the trash made out of the city's garbage is all very specific items. There are toothbrushes and Coke cans, etc., that create this city. But here I had this completely abstract, tiny, small unit which has very little character except they are just shapes and sizes, some little bigger, some little smaller. And that through this abstraction, what could I do? And I've been interested in this small unit as it accumulates, as it builds up, as it creates a kind of spatialization, architecture, landscape, actually acquire a great spatial monumentality. They acquire, and you've already seen images of it. And the various points of view, in my trash show also, it was actually a photographic project where you have a perspectival view and a top angle plan view, and that flattens everything out. And so the image that you saw in the beginning is the top angle flat view. And so in this case, the fragment even becomes more abstract, more minimal, and it starts acquiring the look of a map. And the map, as you know, is flat. It just has some shapes, and it could suggest also by contours of lines that this is higher and this is lower. Here, of course, it rises roughly about maximum about 10 or 11 inches from its lowest point. So anyway, this was there, and I did the shoot. Now the shoot is what I use the next word, that there's a performative element. Even my earlier video in the destruction of that city, which is called Turning, there's a whole performance where I see that the city gets destroyed. In this case, from the beginning, the relationship between water and the shards, between the water having a kind of expanse and a fluidity, was also could be an ominous element, that the waters would finally submerge this port town. And to this day, nobody really knows why Muziris stopped functioning. Was it because the trade with Rome stopped? Was it just silting? Was it invaded? That is all still speculation. But certainly there was a river, whether it is in Pattanam or a town further up, but the river moved westwards. And so this interactive relationship between the earth, the terra, and water was very central to my concept of what I would like to do. So I created a 1 foot high cement wall, and the idea was to submerge this city of mine, where only some portions would remain above. I also used, our film persons will know, the green chroma effect. So I covered green cloths underneath, and whatever was green, I could then key in any image of the water outside, or any other element like clay. So, quickly finish, round up, all right. So the idea of the performance and its disappearance was very, very central to making the video. And then the next big kind of intervention after putting the water in was the title that I have given is Black Gold, and that's from the title that Romila Thapar gives. And black gold refers to pepper. And I realized that pepper has to play a very important part of it in very physical terms. And whatever pepper I put in, it sunk. And then somebody said, why don't you go, and there's some cheap pepper, and that might float. And it really happened, that cheap pepper, half the price, floated. So I threw in 15 kilos of pepper, and you will see in the video, this kind of extraordinary landscape is created by pepper. And then finally, it flows out, and there's a kind of pattern. So I will just show you. You've already seen this, so this is the top angle aerial view, because the proportions have changed from the video, which you'll see. It's not as long as narrow. So this thing that flows, the shape there, that's a river. And then this is a kind of more perspectival view of it. I must say that these 2,000-year-old sherds, it had a way of communicating that they are that old. There was a sort of softness, there's a roundness to the edge, and there was a visible expression on the people that this isn't just some pots I've broken, but that they carry that aura or that patina of something being that old. Structures like this, or like this, refer to just before this period as this being called a megalithic site. And so these very simple forms like this refer to that. And here is a juxtaposition of two things, and I think Shuddha is still here. When he walked in, he said, "Oh, this looks like a drawing." And actually to somebody else, one of the Kerala artists, Radical Artists Association group, Prabhakaran, and he said, "It reminds me of your Machu Picchu drawings." And you can see that there is a very close parallel visual texture. And I will run the video now. It's just 4 minutes long. I'm sorry, you did see some installation shot. The video is projected onto the ground and it is 40 feet long. And that's very important to experience both the space, it's without sound, both the spatial of it as well as the fact that you're looking down, and that 40 feet to have a sense of the whole which when projected is easy to grasp in one look, but you do have to move, and you're moving your body was a very important part of what this installation is about. The full video is 11 minutes, this is a 4-minute clip. That ground is all made of pepper. The sort of yellow ochre water that you see moving, I let the water out because it had 2 holes for the exit, and I made this water out of clay. So I wanted this yellow ochre effect to also differentiate between the peppercorn and the water. And this is the last shot, which in the original is little over a minute 10 seconds. And I was very interested in the aspect of slow time, and that when you're looking at it, it hardly seems to move or anything to happen. And so the aspect of going back in time, of another time zone, both emotionally and mentally, and that nothing really happens, nothing moves. Thank you.
Can I ask Gayatri and Shiva to please come to the stage? These are the last 2 speakers, and we'll do a short question. You're only 45 minutes late. I'm going to invite Shiva to speak first and Gayatri to end, because she, I think, has a different take on the kind of proposition I made. I think Gayatri would like to, in some way, shift the ground. So, yeah. Shiva.
This evening I speak to you as a wayfarer, an itinerant, a bum, a tramp, a vagrant, figures that I have an ontological affinity with, often obscured by other identities as artist, activist, occasional commentator and writer. I start by revisiting a much-loved text by Italo Calvino, The City of Zora. This city, which cannot be expunged from the mind, is like an armature, a honeycomb in whose cells each of us can place the things he wants to remember. Names of famous men, virtues, numbers, vegetable and mineral classifications, dates of battles, constellations, paths of speech. Between each idea and each point of the itinerary, an affinity or contrast can be established, serving as an immediate aid to memory. I place next to this a quotation from Quintilian from Francis Yates' The Art of Memory. The first notion is placed, as it were, in the forecourt. The second, let us say, in the atrium. The remainder are placed in order all around the impluvium and committed not only to bedrooms and parlors, but even to statues and the like. This done, when one is required to revive the memory, one begins from the first place to run through it all, demanding what has been entrusted to them, of which one will be reminded by the image. What I have spoken of as being done in a house can also be done in public buildings or on a long journey or in going through a city or with pictures. Or we can imagine such places for ourselves, end quote. Classical mnemonics use space, place, buildings, streets, and cities as loci for texts and ideas, for signs and sensations. The classical scholars and orators who used place to anchor their texts were most often presenting an argument, whether philosophic speculation, social analysis, or doctrinal dissent. Interestingly, the relative merits of doing this with actual spaces or imagined ones remained controversial. Such a reliance on images of places to remember texts suggests that conversely, when the Hellenistic architect thought about buildings and cities, he imagined them containing memories of ideas. And so some of the same rules which govern the making of memory cities for the scholar also inform the process of making cities memorable. The one resonant, consistent note that any conversation about the Kochi Biennale strikes is that of potent sites. Aspinwall, Pepper House, Moides Place, the Wharf, David Hall, the renovated Darbar Hall have become part of an interior referential landscape shared by all, both local, for whom these particularities are portmanteaued into Biennale, and non-local visitors, both from the art world as well as tourists. So these have suddenly acquired an investment with idea. Series of ideas, series of texts, series of sensations, layers of affect, located particularly within sites that are imbued with their own history and perhaps with unknown biographies. So distinct from conventional articulation of historical sites as heritage, distinct from the recuperation of past as a form of nostalgia, and distinct from the marketing of the old or the traditional within tourism, which Kochi is replete with, the constellation of contemporary art within these historical spaces, which are already imbued with memory, which Sheila described so beautifully, enables the reading of the fictive. And in this I would include those works that seem to draw primarily on the documents, such as Camp or Ahmed Matar, for example, within the historical real. What this produces is very interesting kind of instability, an instability both of temporality and of vocabulary. There is a kind of movement, a tension between the historicity of the site, its abandonment, its reference to ruin and past, and with the kind of languages of articulation that are now located with them, and with the kind of ideas that they seem to become a mnemonic device for. This evocation of a multiverse of imaginaries, whether situated locally or referring to different geographies, Bhaskars of the Northern Hemisphere, the poetry of Kalidas, the mangrove islands of the Sundarbans, the forests of Amar Kanwar, the concrete bridges of Saudi Arabia, the archaeological digs at Muziris, etc., etc., etc. It is almost as though this place has within it another place, and in fact one begins to then read the Biennale as a multi-layered city which could be perhaps a transcultural mnemonic device, one that we use to remember